Good evening. My name is Susan Roy, and I'd like to welcome you tonight to a forum for the mayoral candidates for the City of Northampton. This event is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Greater Northampton area and the Northampton Council on Aging. I'd like to introduce tonight our guests. On my far right, we have Rachel Simpson, who is editor for Elder Vision, publication of the Council on Aging. To my right is Mary Claire Higgins, our mayor. To my left is mayoral candidate Rick Feldman, and to my far left is Fred Contrada of the Republican. We're going to begin tonight with a couple of opening statements, and as a result of a coin toss, it's been decided that Rick will begin. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Rick.
Well, thank you very much. First, I want to thank the Council on Aging and the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight, having the opportunity to talk to the voters of Northampton. My opening statement is less about myself and more about why I'm running for mayor. I'd like you to elect me mayor if you want to build a city that has a great and bright future, because now Northampton is completing 6 years of crisis management after 8 years of crisis creation. And if we keep on the current track, we can expect more of the same. This future is not all that secure or bright, and I'll do 5 things immediately to make a difference. I'll empower neighborhoods to be at the table of government. Effective neighborhood participation, not just public input, but real involvement in planning, problem solving, decision making, and action is at the core. I want to mobilize our neighborhoods to tackle the problems that help make Northampton great. Begin to implement an economic strategy action. Before the end of the first year, we can work together with all of our expertise, our intelligence, our experience, local resources to have an action plan and start toward economic revival to ensure that we have a vibrant downtown, a clean downtown, a dramatic reduction in panhandling and vagrancy, and a program that helps Northampton regain its markets in tourism and retail. And we can have all this plan and this action in the first year. As part of this economic renewal, I'll include conservation, carefully linking that to economic development, recreation, open space, and housing. We have existing plans now that point us in the direction of having a greenway, linking all of the fragile spaces and all the important spaces throughout Northampton, so we could have a continuous green belt running through Northampton, protecting the environment, wildlife, water resources, and that can attract the kind of business and investment that we want. I'll have us operating with a balanced and expanded tax base. We need to have the economic development that will bring us local revenues. And by starting now, something that Northampton should have been on the road to do years ago, we can generate the needed local revenue for schools and the things that we need. In the current political and economic reality, I don't think we can depend so much on state and federal sources. I don't think we're going to expect to get much more from that. We need to think about acting creatively, and we need to look at local and regional capacity. And I'll bring experience and leadership. I think the city is desperate now for good planning and problem solving, going past the several years we've been in of event-driven and project-driven action. So that's why I'm running for mayor, and I think I can achieve those things quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Claire, a
Thanks
few
for-
words.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight on the television to all the citizens of Northampton. Thanks to the League and thanks to the Council on Aging. It's nice to be here in the Comcast studio. I hope someday this Comcast studio, and I expect it will be in the high school when the next time there's a mayoral debate. That's the hope of the renegotiation of the Comcast contract. I've been the mayor for the last 6 years, and during that time, there's been some struggles. The country went into a recession. The state budget lost an incredible amount of revenues, and the city therefore lost an incredible amount of revenue. But even during that time, we've been able to make some forward progress on a number of issues. We've done a significant amount of reorganizing in city government to make it work more effectively and efficiently for the citizens here in the city, including revamping the finance departments to create accountability. We've relocated offices so that they make more sense relocated next to the offices, that they work most closely together with the building inspector and the health department, for instance, city clerk and the registrar of voters. We negotiated with both our police and fire unions to come out of civil service. The civil service had been really a barrier to hiring police and firefighters in a timely fashion, creating additional pressure on our budget. And we worked with those unions to come out of civil service and got that bill through the legislature. We kept our health care cost, which has really been one of the most difficult things about the budget process in the public sector and in the private sector here in Massachusetts and across the country. But we managed to keep our increase in health care costs at half of what the statewide average was for municipalities, because we worked effectively with the unions and went out to bid and worked the health care marketplace to get the best deal we could get for the city. We created and expanded on the capital planning process in a way that is allowing us to get at some long delayed projects. The state is now coming out of the recession slower than any other state in the country, I might add, as I heard on the radio the other day. And the state now shows a surplus in revenues. I've worked with a statewide organization on a municipal finance task force that showed that the problems that Northampton has are not unique, and the state has to be a partner at the table with cities and towns. This task force had public and private sector folks on it, and did a very good job, I thought, of laying out why cities and towns in the Commonwealth have such difficulty when the state steps away, which it has done since the Proposition 2.5 referendum passed in 1981. The state has had two major recessions, and during both of those recessions dramatically cut aid to cities and towns. We need to work together in the city, and we need to work together across the Commonwealth to bring the state back to the table as an effective partner with cities and towns. That's what I want to do in the next couple of years as mayor. I want to continue the work on the capital planning process, and I especially want to do a significant amount of work on our new comprehensive planning process, Sustainable Northampton, that I announced in May. This is the first comprehensive plan that the city has had in 30 years, and I think it's going to help shape the future in a way that I hope is as inclusive as possible. And the way it'll be inclusive is if people turn out and show up and help have their voice heard. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. This is a call-in program this evening, and we will encourage listeners who are watching to use the telephone number, which I believe is on your screen, and call in. While we are waiting, we will begin with a question from Fred Contrada.
Thank you. This is a question for Mayor Higgins. Some people have felt that too many decisions and perhaps too much policy in your administration has been made behind closed doors. Can you respond to that and just explain what your administrative philosophy is?
Well, I'd like to hear an example of that. Ultimately, all the policy decisions, most of the policy decisions in the city, I would say, are made ultimately by votes of the council or votes of the planning board, votes of the zoning board, or any of those other committees or commissions. Certainly, I've had conversations with people about direction of the city, both in private and public, but ultimately, all those decisions are made through a voting process. An example of that would be the question of expansion of Smith College. I met initially with representatives of the college and representatives of the neighborhood in my office, and I heard what different people were thinking. We put together a ad hoc committee that included representatives of the neighborhood and representatives of the college. It included the city councilors who represented the area, and then we did a public charrette, which was open to citywide to anybody who wanted to come. I signed a development agreement with the college, but that still needs to be voted on by the planning board and by the city council. So I think that there's a significant amount of public input on all the decisions that are made. In the city of Northampton, we have a ward-based system of city council. So city councilors really are in touch with what's going on in their wards, and I really depend on them to help convey the message both to the wards and back to me about what the folks in the ward are thinking about. And that's why I've how to practice in those kinds of situations, like
Hello?
the Smith College expansion, of having the ward counselor actually there at the table while the discussion is happening.
Did you want to say a few bits about that, or?
No, I'll wait. I
We'll go on
thought
to
I
it.
started to hear a caulk.
Do we have a call? Not yet. Well, in that case, Rachel, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I'm just interested in a very basic level on how each of you feels about the Community Preservation Act, which is on the ballot November 8th.
Would you like to start?
Sure. I'm on record as supporting the
Hello?
CPA. I've said that I'll vote for it. And I said that what I'm driven by really is the outcome of the CPA, what we're trying to accomplish with it. And as I said in my opening remarks, I'm a firm believer in preserving the open space resources, historical preservation, the assets of the city that we need to protect, and the CPA provides a tool to do those things. I don't think it's the only tool, and I don't think we should be stopped in achieving those goals whether or not the CPA is passed. So if the CPA is not passed, I still think we want to achieve those goals. I still think we want a committee in town that brings together the issues that the CPA attempts to bring together. And I still think we want to forge ahead and protect open space and recreation assets. If the CPA is passed, what I've also said is I would like to make sure that as many vacant seats on the citywide committee that gets created would be elected seats. I want to make sure that people are really heard on how that money is spent. And I would like to see that the planning process that goes into identifying which land is protected first, which historical projects are priorities, what housing interests are priorities. I want to make sure that that planning process is in place by the time state money comes to us.
Thanks. Claire?
I'm a reluctant supporter of the CPA. I was asked by the Broadbrook Coalition, which is the first time I've been asked by any group to state a position, and I said in their newsletter that I'm a reluctant supporter, and I'm reluctant because the initial funding mechanism for the CPA was supposed to be the deed transfer tax and not an additional levy on the property tax. And I think the property tax, which is the only direct funding that cities and towns get to control, is already stressed. Nevertheless, I think it is worth supporting. It has the goals I agree with. Every vote that we've had to preserve open space, I've been for. I've been a strong supporter of recreation, and have funded in my capital budgets recreation, open space, and historical preservation. In particular, I think the Forbes Library shows us that there are some really treasured assets in the city that we're going to be hard-pressed to preserve without some additional help. The city does have an open space and recreation plan, and has had one for many years that has identified all has identified both open space that various groups, including Broadbrook Coalition, the Conservation Commission, and others, feel is worthy of preservation, and the Recreation Commission works on laying out what their priorities are for recreation opportunities. So I think the planning is in place and very well done by Conservation Commission, Recreation Commission, and others, and that is accepted by the City Council by a vote. And the Planning Department, in its wearing its housing planning hat, has also done significant work looking at housing issues. So I think that planning is in place and will help, in the event that the CPA passes, will help guide the allocation process for that group.
We have a caller on the phone. Could you please go ahead, caller?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, my question is for the mayor.
Can you tell us who you are?
Do I have to?
Can you give us a first name?
Barry.
Hi, Barry. What's your question?
Can I just, are you getting an echo? I just want to lower my TV. Or if you're not getting an echo, it's fine.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I attended a meeting on Proposition 2.5,
Mm-hmm.
and many of the people were upset about having taxes increased.
Mm-hmm.
And when the mayor came to speak, she said the solution was more affordable housing. And I guess my question to her is, does she draw a distinction between affordable housing and subsidized housing? And doesn't she realize that when you add affordable housing, displacing marketplace set affordable housing, what you get is subsidized housing that increases taxes?
Okay, I'm sorry, Barry, that I don't remember giving that as the answer for solving the tax problem, because I don't think affordable housing is the answer to solving the tax problem. I think there are some other answers, but I'll leave that for another answer. Let me talk for a minute about affordable housing and how I'm defining it. I think affordable is much more broad than the question of subsidized housing. We need housing in this community that's affordable to people who are working in this community, whether or not they're firefighters who work in the city or police officers, people who work in various businesses in downtown. Our housing prices have escalated much faster than our wages. In fact, this has been identified again as a statewide problem, and Massachusetts is one of the only states in the country, is the only state in the country that lost population. And this is an area where I agree with our Republican governor. One of the reasons is because of the crunch in affordable housing. So we've worked as a city to try to expand the opportunities for people to have housing in the city, whether it's preserving housing that has subsidy, whether it's working for Habitat for Humanity to build houses that people can own, or whether it's working as subdivisions go in to create some opportunities in those subdivisions for more affordable housing that people buy and own in those subdivisions. And at the state hospital to expand housing opportunities there as well. I think if we as a Commonwealth and as we as a city don't take this issue of housing for working people very seriously, it's going to create an incredible strain on our economy. I don't think it's necessarily going to solve the tax problem, the question of property tax, and how to keep that in check. And I think that question is better solved by creating a much better partnership with state government.
So you see,
It sounds like there's a follow-up.
yes, because I'm not sure you made the distinction that I was looking for between subsidized and affordable. It seemed to me that the housing that exists right now on Green Street area is affordable housing, and it's affordable because it was built a long time ago. There's not much expense to maintain it. Whereas when you build new housing, and if you order the management or the owners to subsidize it, then that ultimately comes out of the taxpayers, and it forces residents of Northampton out of the community because they can't afford the higher taxes. And eventually what you're left with are the very rich or people who are being subsidized by the taxpayer. And that's a dilemma that has occurred in many cities, and it seems like you're pushing more and more people out of Northampton who are low-income wage earners. And I see you shaking your head on the TV, so,
I'm actually,
so you hear me. So
I'm actually nodding my head, and let me tell you where I think I agree with you and where I don't agree with you. I agree with you that working people are forced out of communities when there's not affordable housing for them. I don't think that I ever envisioned that the replacement housing for the Smith College units that Smith is taking down would necessarily be subsidized by the taxpayers. In fact, it's to be subsidized by Smith. So leaving that aside, the dilemma, Green Street, the neighborhood there currently, many of those units are owned by people who don't necessarily have financing on those units. But what we've seen in other neighborhoods in the city, and I can think of neighborhoods in Ward 3, streets in Ward 3, which used to be a very affordable neighborhood on Market Street, on Graves Ave, where the rental units were affordable for a long time. Then the owner sold them at market rate, and the new rents, in order to cover the cost of that sale, went up pretty dramatically. So it's a difficult question about how to sustain affordable rentals, market rentals, in the case of a turnover where somebody certainly, and I don't blame them, are going to sell the building for the highest possible price they can get. And they should. That's what that's the way it works in our culture. So, in our society. So I think you make some good points, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that. And in terms of of subsidy, there's a lot of different ways that one can talk about subsidy. There may be a direct cash subsidy, but there also may be through zoning, allowing for a couple more units to be built in a subdivision if a couple of those units are priced at a better price. Not necessarily a very low price, but at a little bit better price that allows a working person to buy there. I think that that's one of the many tools that the city's used successfully.
Thanks, Barry, for calling in. We're going to give Rick a chance to talk a little bit about your thoughts on affordable housing.
I think the issues of affordable housing facing the city are really broad and encompass a lot about regional economics and the city's economics. So right now, making money on real estate speculation has become a new economic engine of sorts. And so a new form of speculation is on housing, land, and all kinds of real estate properties and development. So the sad thing for Northampton is not having other economic opportunities and incentives for investors, but having plenty of real estate for that level of speculation, and we're starting to see that heat up with commercial properties now as well as housing. So there's something parallel going on here. For example, square footage rents for businesses in town have skyrocketed, just like rental properties for housing have skyrocketed. So all through the city, we're experiencing an interesting problem of real estate speculation, very heated up, because compared to other places in the country, Northampton has lots of opportunity to make quick money on real estate. Part of the answer is, part of the solution has got to be a regional approach, that this isn't just Northampton, as the mayor said, it's a statewide issue, but it's also something in Western Mass that we need to work on with partnerships and cooperation with other cities and towns. So we need to have strategies that develop housing opportunities in a multi-town area, not just in Northampton. I don't think we can solve affordable housing or affordable retail space by just staying within the borders of Northampton.
Thank you. I know we have another caller on the line, but before we go to that person, I would like to know if you had a question that you wanted to ask.
I do. It's for Mr. Feldman. Mayor Higgins is running on a record. Can you explain what your goals and your expectations were when you took over as executive director of Hampshire Community Action Commission, and say whether you think you've achieved those?
I was hired as interim executive director and then full executive director about a year ago with the explicit assignment from the board at that time to either try to save it, or if that wasn't possible, to at least save the programs, find homes for all the programs. When we discovered that the damage to the organization was some multiple of 5 to 10 times worse than what we had been told by the outgoing administration, staff, the union, board members, officials basically concluded this can't be saved, not without dramatic amount of public infusion of dollars, and there was no source for that. So the next course of action was to do the second thing, and that is find homes for all the programs. And to date, that's happened. So the people who had been served by HCAC have continued to be served. And as you know, there's a new agency that has expanded into Hampshire County, Franklin Community Action Commission, and they've become a home of a number of those programs, particularly early childhood. But other organizations, United Way has stepped in, Tapestry has stepped in, so other organizations have become hosts for these programs, and people have continued to get services. So I would say that it was successful. We succeeded, but I'm not thrilled. I mean, I would have loved to have saved it, but it you know, you can't save an organization that's far in debt and causing that much damage. So.
Thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think that Mr. Feldman stepped into a situation that was not retrievable, and I think he and the board did the best they could with the circumstances that they had. I do think it's very sad that that we lost an agency of 30 years in the county, and that we now have those services scattered to a number of different agencies. I hope that Franklin Community Action Commission is able to create a Hampshire community identity, which I expect they'll do. And I hope that all the services that low and moderate income people need in our county can come back under one roof, because I think that's the best model for low and moderate income people.
Thank you. Thank you, caller, for waiting. Could you give us your first name and ask your question, please?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Could you speak a little more loudly?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. I'm not a longtime resident of Northampton. As a matter of fact, I'm rather recent resident, but I love the great cultural diversity and just diversity of the town is amazing. One thing that it kind of continues to be kind of shocking about having moved here is just simply the notices we receive every week or every month about our water that we drink. And I was wondering if Mayor Higgins could perhaps explain, and then perhaps, I don't know if there's a conversation that exists, but what role the local government does have, or what role the local government could have in resolving this issue. And I'll take my answer offline. Okay? Thank you.
Sure. That's a good question, and I know lots of people have questions about those notices, so I'm glad you brought it up. The City of Northampton is your water provider. The city runs a municipal water system, and in the early 90s, the city was ordered by the federal government, by the EPA, to build a water treatment plant. The mayor at that time was able to get a waiver from that requirement to filter, because the water from our reservoirs met the requirements of the Surface Water Drinking Act. There are regulations that say what the levels of various particles, et cetera, in the water can be, and we met the regulations. In the year 2000, just as I came in as mayor, we exceeded one of the levels in the water, and the EPA said that we would have to filter. We, after much discussion with EPA, agreed to filter, primarily because the regulations then changed, right, and I think it was 2001. And we would no longer meet those regulations, even with the care that we were taking for the reservoirs, managing the watershed, et cetera. We spent a significant amount of the Water Enterprise Fund doing that kind of management of the watershed to keep the water pure, but we weren't going to be able to meet that goal, even with that. So we began the process of planning the construction of a water treatment plant. If you're not in compliance with the regulation, you get that notice. And we're required to send that notice out to citizens, letting them know that we're not in compliance. If you saw in the paper last week, we opened bids for the construction of the water treatment plant. It's going to cost about $25 million to build. We have about half of that covered in a 2% loan from the federal, it's federal money through the state government, lent to us at 2%, which is cheaper than we can get if we went to the bond market to borrow money. We have very high hopes that the state will lend us the balance as well at 2%. And we'll be building the plant. Hopefully it'll be online by September of 2007. And people will no longer receive those notices. And it will allow us to drop the amount of chlorine that we're required to put in the water in order to make sure that the water is clean and safe to drink. The city also has a very old distribution system. The pipes that run under the city are also very old, and we're on an ongoing effort to replace those pipes. And that's work that is going to continue really forever. We're going to be replacing pipes. If we finally get through all of the old pipes that need to be replaced, we'll be back around to the beginning and have to start all over again. So we're going to be replacing pipes forever. But the water treatment plant, the goal is to have it up and running by the year 2007, and then you won't get those notices anymore. I noticed that there's Poland Springs water on the table. I actually drink Northampton water, and I use it to cook and everything else, and I don't have any problem with it. But I know that some people are upset by those notices and choose not to drink it.
I think the other concern that people raise about water is water cost, and to raise the money for this project, Northampton's water fees have skyrocketed, and so I've had somebody write to me say, I spend 10 times as much money a year on my water expenses as a friend of mine who lives in East Hampton with a similar sized family. And so we've heard those kind of issues, and I think that is a problem for East Hampton, for Northampton to confront. It's hard to recruit businesses. It's hard to come to terms with things like affordable housing when those kinds of costs are there. So another issue isn't the completion of the project and safe water, but the cost of water. And I think we have a lot of work to do to change that situation.
I'd like to just mention that while our rates have gone up and they need to go up in order to be able to pay for the plant, we need to pay for that plant. We're right now a little bit below the median of water costs in the entire state. It's cold comfort when you get the bill, I agree. And if there's ways, any creative ways that folks know to mitigate the cost, we're certainly open to hearing about them. But ultimately, we will have to pay for building that plant. And we have looked to the federal government to see if the federal government was willing to give us a grant as opposed to a loan. The federal government's no longer in the business of giving grants to cities and towns to do that kind of infrastructure work, unfortunately.
I believe we have a caller. And caller, if you could give us your first name and tell us what your question is. Go ahead, please.
My first name is Marlene. I live in Northampton, but I am the Director of Economic Development for Greenfield. So my question is for Mr. Feldman. In his opening remarks, you said that you were going to ensure economic revival, including clean downtown, tourism, retail, that you were going to attract businesses, and you were going to generate local revenue. My question is how? Specifically, how are you going to ensure economic revival and generate local revenue?
Well, I hope that in giving my answer, you don't implement it in Greenfield before we have a chance to implement it in Northampton, because actually there's some overlap here. For example, Western Massachusetts is known as one of the hotbeds of alternative energy industries, research and development, small businesses. Certainly, you had a business in Greenfield that was recently in the newspapers for its new fuel systems. There's one in East Hampton called Grease Car, a company I'm more familiar with, does conversion of diesel fuel to vegetable fuel. There's a number of these kinds of industries and businesses around Western Mass, and I think one of the target groups for Northampton needs to be helping incubate those businesses, finding a home for them, attracting them to Northampton. Similarly, other creative technology businesses throughout Western Mass. It's my sense in working with the university, and soon we'll be working with the School of Engineering with Smith College as that expands, and other institutions of higher education. There's a lot of business R&D, a lot of new development. We need to be attracting it and placing it into viable locations in Northampton. So I actually think that we have that opportunity, and we can be aggressive in doing that. I should add, even though knowing that you're from Greenfield, I think that the regional approach is also applicable here, just as it was in housing. There are things we can do as partners, and in cooperation and coordination. There was, in fact, a plan at one time that identified a East Hampton, Northampton economic development strategy. There's one in Western Mass that emerged out of the Economic Development Council of Western Mass, and I think there's lots of coordination and cooperation that started with Franklin County and Hampshire County, and I would build on those. So those are some quick answers on the industrial side of development. On the more commercial side and the retail side, I have first a concern I want to address, and then go into that question. Am I going too long on this? Okay. When our entire economic engine is based on retail, we actually lose money from the region. So we need to find ways to have businesses and industries that retain capital to create new businesses and to put into things like water treatment plants and human services and all the other things that we want to have done. So we need some strategies, investment strategies, where towns and cities are active in helping finance business startups, helping their expansion, and helping capture and retain some of those revenues back into the region for reinvestment. A number of things come to mind. I know that there's this E2M project in Western Mass that is in fact designed and currently active in doing exactly that. So I would recommend that we all get behind those kinds of activities. Finally, on the retail side, the competition around the region has escalated. Northampton was sort of the heartbeat of restaurants, entertainment spots, nice shops. It still is, but now it's facing lots of competition. And so we have to become very proactive to attract shoppers, and we have to do things that make it comfortable for shoppers here. Parking is an issue. We need more parking in Northampton. We need to make it feel safe and clean and enjoyable. And so there's some effort we have to expend to make sure that people feel happy to be shoppers here and that businesses feel like they're being supported and taken care of.
I appreciate that. I can honestly tell you that's very ambitious of you, and I applaud you for it. I know Mayor Higgins has been extremely instrumental in getting a lot of accomplished what you're talking about, and I thank you for your time, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you, Marlene. Go ahead.
You know, when we're talking about economic development, I want to separate out some things here. One is talking about what drives the economy here in Northampton and in the Pioneer Valley. And well, Northampton is really known for its restaurants and its commercial district. In fact, our highest employers, our largest employers, are Smith College and Cooley Dickinson Hospital. And actually, Cooley Dickinson Hospital is now the largest employer. And the other large employer of people who live in the city of Northampton is UMass. So in terms of who's employing folks here, it is actually the healthcare and the education sector and the nonprofit sector that are huge employers and really create what for us actually ends up being a pretty stable base in terms of jobs, except for when the state has trouble. And when the state has trouble and UMass has trouble, then our folks are having trouble because they're such a large employer of folks here. And the second piece of that job base comes from state-funded social services, which we have quite a bit of, and when the state has trouble, we have trouble. So one issue is jobs, and we're seeing expansions in the nonprofit sector. I also want to mention the VA as another driver in terms of employment. So we're seeing expansion at the Cooley Dickinson Hospital, we're seeing expansion at Smith. The dilemma for the city and for many cities and towns is that the growth in the nonprofit sector doesn't translate into tax revenue for the city to go ahead and do what the city needs to do. So that's a dilemma that we have to face. The state passed a law in 1846, I think, that exempted those nonprofits from taxes. I'd like to see that revisited, and I've worked on that at the state level and will continue to work on that, but that's a dilemma for us. But I think it's great that we're getting new jobs in the healthcare area. I think it's great that we're getting new jobs in stable environments, that people have jobs that, by and large, are you can rely on. Smith went through a belt tightening and cut people. Cooley Dick has done that, but by and large, their jobs are stable. Then we have the second question, which is the question of growing businesses that are non-commercial businesses. The city of Northampton actually has one of the lowest commercial vacancy rates in the area. We have some of the highest rents, as Mr. Feldman recognized earlier. We need more space, and that's what we're trying to do at the state hospital, is to develop more space for businesses to expand into, so that those kinds of businesses that he refers to can grow here. We grow a lot of businesses in Northampton, and when they grow too big, they move other places. We need to try to keep them here, and we need to develop that space. Northampton's challenged in terms of space because we don't have easily developable space anymore. You know, you drive to East Hampton and it's amazing how the field just levels out as soon as you cross the town line, and you can easily develop that land on the other side of the border, and East Hampton's done a very good job of doing that. The land on this side of the border is difficult to develop. The same is true driving north to Hatfield. Nevertheless, we have to make what we can of our assets, and the state hospital is the first place that I think we can make a big difference in terms of creating new and expanded space for businesses to grow in our community. So, and then the third mention was this mention of regional approach. I agree that we need to work together with our city and town partners. A job in the Pioneer Valley is a job that benefits all of us. So if an employer comes here, I would like them to be in Northampton, but if they're not in Northampton, I'd rather them be in Greenfield or Hatfield than them be in Eastern Mass. And so we need to work together to keep jobs here in the western part of the state. Again, the dilemma is we don't get the tax revenue from the expansion of that business right in our own community. So these are some areas that we need to work on. And I have been working on. We've done a significant amount of work in terms of creating an economic target area for the city, which has allowed some of our businesses to take advantage of the state investment tax credit. We have a business assistance program that's worked with over 200 businesses. We've did a business visitation program to understand what the issues that businesses have here in the city and how we can work with them. We've been working on those, and I'm looking forward to continue working on those areas and more.
I know we have a caller waiting, but before we go to that caller, did you want to ask a
I
question?
would like to ask a question. If you walk into my office, you see a place at the Council on Aging. It's very busy. It's full of some of the city's seniors, and we always have something going on. And aside from the issue of the senior center, which is finally on its way, I'd like to know, especially in terms of baby boomers who are starting to turn 60, and the rest of us following shortly behind, what you see as some of the biggest issues or concerns for the city's senior population, and
Soon to be seniors.
or soon to be seniors, pre-seniors, and how you would address those issues. And I'd like just one or two from each of you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ruth. I feel like I've been talking for the last 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, additional issues for seniors that I'm familiar with include transportation services. Now, I know that transportation services is a very complex issue, but I think we need to commit ourselves to finding some way to provide transportation support for seniors. But this, of course, some of this is tough. I am one of those people who's rapidly approaching that magic cutoff. So I'm trying to figure out what else do I want to see happen. But that's a key piece. The question on taxes remains a key piece. A number of our seniors who live in their own homes, they're on fixed incomes. Their medical costs have skyrocketed. Other costs have skyrocketed. It's very difficult for them to think of spending any additional money. So somehow we have to figure out how we can reduce costs living in the city for seniors so that they have money for the things that they need. And that, I think, includes things like fees at Look Park, simple, easy, perhaps easily approachable kinds of things. So the two things that strike me as most pressing for seniors would be transportation and reduction of costs living in the city.
Well, the city of Northampton has become a place where folks actually come to retire, which I thought was really interesting. Some people leave to retire, and then some people move here to retire. I know the senior centers or the Council on Aging's had a number of seniors who've gotten acquainted with the city through getting active at the senior activities at the Council on Aging. So that's always been interesting to me, and I think that we need to pay attention to that sector who wants to downsize and move to the city. And also provide opportunities here for people who live here and who want to stay here, but maybe not need to take care of as much of a house or so on. Give them some opportunities to live within walking distance of the services that they need, and that may address some of the transportation issues. I also think we have to figure out a way to support people in their homes if that's what they choose to do. My elderly mother lives in her home, and my brother lives with her right now in order to help her stay in her home, and that's what she wants to do. And that's worked for my family, and I think we have to, and I know the Council on Aging does that, help support people in the choices that they make. Property taxes are an issue for seniors, and I have consistently supported on the state level with the Mass Municipal Association an increase in the amount of exemption that seniors can have. Those exemptions have not been updated throughout the years, and they should be looked at regularly by the state legislature. Locally, if we give an exemption, we have to fund that exemption. The state has the power to both give the exemption and fund it back to the city or town, and I hope the state will take that question up. I also want to just thank Stan Rosenberg for taking that question up when he worked on the senior circuit breaker tax program that I think has benefited a number of our seniors. And our assessors and the tax collector both are very good at working individually with any senior who is having an issue and trying to find what programs match up. But we do need help from the state in terms of the ultimate tax relief that could be available to seniors.
Thanks. Thank you to the caller for waiting so graciously. Could you give us your first name and your question, please?
Hi, my name's Phil.
Go ahead,
And
Phil.
my question is for Mr. Feldman. The last three mayors, I believe, have faced fairly massive cuts in state aid. I believe the current mayor right now has had to deal with about $3 million in cuts from state aid. If you were mayor and you were faced with $3 million in cuts, where would you make these cuts? And please be specific. Thank you.
Great question. I can't possibly answer the question, however, for the following reasons. One is I don't believe that the cuts that I could recommend would be informed by budgets and knowledge from all the departments, and I think that it would be irresponsible for me to come out and say, here's the places where I cut. I can tell you that it would be extremely painful and difficult to cut an additional $3 million from the Northampton budget. It seems to me to be a pretty lean budget, and I certainly wouldn't want it to see. I certainly want to see those cuts come out of places that I know are going to hurt people the most, and frankly, I think that's almost at every department. So I would struggle with that one right now. I'd have to look at where money is spent, how it's spent. I'd have to talk to people in city government to find out what kind of leeway they have in different programs. And I just don't feel like I'm the one that's prepared to answer a $3 million reduction, immediate reduction in the city budget.
Well, now you know how I felt.
Yes, I do. I know exactly how you felt.
Except it wasn't, I had a sense of what we could do and what we couldn't do. And I knew that almost everything we would have to do in order to take $3 million out of the budget would affect real people, would affect the ability of the city to offer services, and would affect kids in our schools, and it did. The state cut 20% of our education aid, it cut our lottery, and it cut our additional assistance. And that money has not really come back, with the exception of some of the lottery money. But we were able to hold the line on public safety in terms of cuts, and we cut them some, but we were able to hold the staffing steady even with those cuts. And on the school department, we, after an additional $500,000 cut when we got mid-year cuts from the state, we held the budget level in the schools. And in fact, $3 million state aid cut wasn't the only problem. The other problem was the dramatic increase in health insurance. And those two coupled actually created enormous pressure on the system. So we're now working our way out of it. This last year we were able to increase the school's budget by $700,000 or so. We still are using reserves, and we'll have to do that for another year or so in order to balance the budget. But I'm optimistic that we are out of the worst of it now. And one good thing that came out of it was that we created the first stabilization fund that the cities had for 15 years, and we're actually on target to create a second stabilization fund reserved for capital at the end of this year.
Two quick comments I want to add. One comment is understanding what the mayor and the city was going through when those kind of cuts were happening, we were able to mobilize a lot of private funds. So we organized Support Our Schools, we organized Northampton Education Foundation, and we helped create a trust fund for schools. And so we found other ways to bring in supplemental funds. Obviously, that's a drop in the bucket compared to all that needed to be done, but we got the ball rolling. So a partnership with the private sector and with individuals and households has helped buffer some of the most dramatic cuts. In fact, at one point, Support Our Schools was the only source of funds for public school libraries. And I think that that's now been turned around in the newest budgets for the high school at least. But it's an indication of what we can do as a community. But the question, I guess I wanted to pose this back to the mayor. The question that was posed to me is, what would I do with an additional $3 million cut? And so what would you do with another dramatic $3 million
Well,
sudden cut?
I didn't hear the question that way, but I don't think that the city has much left to cut. But and I'm not willing to venture into that. I guess, and I want to go back to something you just said, SOS and the NEF were actually formed, I believe, out of the last time the state cut us, not this time,
Right.
when Mary Ford was the mayor. So what we know about this is that it's cyclical. If the state is in a recession, we get dramatic cuts. We got dramatic cuts under Dave Musanti in the late 80s. We got dramatic cuts when Mary Ford was the mayor in the early 90s, and then we got another set of dramatic cuts under my administration. In addition, the city, since 1993, has not seen the kind of revenue growth that other cities and towns have seen because of the way we were treated under the Ed Reform Bill. The report that I worked on with other statewide folks shows that across the state, not just in the city of Northampton, that non-school spending has been flat or declined, and that all of us believe that another round of those kinds of cuts would be devastating to the kind of services that everybody expects to get from local government. So I hope that no mayor is faced with another round of $3 million, at least until another 7 or so years has gone by, so that we can build back up in order to be able to withstand it. That was part of the reason why we began the program of creating a stabilization fund and are committed to keeping that stabilization fund available so that it'll be there in the event that there is a recession and a retraction of state aid.
Fred, did you want to have one more question?
Sure. This is for both candidates. Can you say whether you feel that Hospital Hill has fulfilled the promise that you felt it had when it was a blank slate, or is it at least on its way towards that?
Claire?
The Hospital Hill project has taken a long time, and I think that's what everybody knows. So it's hard to remember what the original promise was. But I do think we're on the way, and I guess I'm an optimist. I see that we're getting there. We finally have some federal money in that project, which is what we needed. We have some state money in for infrastructure. We know that there are businesses that want to move in onto that site. It's taken a very long time. It's a huge development process up there. And it was big enough so that we also not only had to go through the local permitting process, but we also had to go through the state permitting process. So that takes quite a while. We're further ahead than any other state hospital in the Commonwealth, as far as I know, of the round that has been, Boston State has kind of slowed down to a crawl. Worcester State has a little bit of progress, but the other ones haven't moved at all. We're further along than any of the other ones. And if you've been to the Ice Pond parcel, the housing that's at the Ice Pond parcel, that I think is the promise of that in terms of the housing side. A mixed income neighborhood that looks and feels like a neighbor. Any one of the Northampton neighborhoods, people are working well together, happy to be living on this street together. That really shows me that promise has been fulfilled. We now that we have the road money to work on the south side of the campus, I think we're going to see economic development there within the next year to two.
I remember in 1989, in a more naive age and state, David Sharkin and I applied to the city of Northampton to be consultants to help the emerging Hospital Hill project move further along, and we actually believe that we could do something quickly. So as the mayor has pointed out, it's taken far longer than I think anybody anticipated. It probably will reach fruition, but I don't think it's going to reach fruition in another 15 to 20 years. And part of that reason is that the cleanup of the site and the demolition of buildings and cleanup following that is extremely expensive. I can't see very many private investors wanting to incur that cost, and particularly for the cost associated with part of what the dream was, which was it was going to be incubator space, a place where emerging and new businesses could have a home. And I don't see that happening anytime soon, because anybody who would move in there would incur such heavy cost of development. I don't think they would be able to give away space at an incubator rate. So there's certain troubles with that. It will require a good deal of additional public funding to make that happen. I don't see that happening in the short term. The other part of the Hospital Hill that does scare me a bit is the conversion of nurses' quarters right now to affordable housing. I know that that's a project that needs to happen. It was part of the original plan. What makes me nervous about it is that it's in the middle of a campus that's otherwise pretty desolate. And I admit that it rings bells for me. When I was in elementary school, I grew up in a housing project in Philadelphia. I knew about poverty. I lived poverty. And I hate to see housing in the middle of that kind of environment. It's hard for me to imagine a family with children wanting to live in the middle of the current Hospital Hill situation. So I'm hoping that something happens soon to attract dollars for cleanup. I know that our legislators are working on it, but again, I'm just not confident that Hospital Hill is something we can hang our hats on in the short term. In the long term, there's greater likelihood.
We really only have a couple more minutes to our program, so instead of asking another caller to do a question, I think we're going to give you each about 60 seconds or so to say something about what gets you up, what gets you jazzed about this place, and why do you do this day in and day out, and in your case, why would you like to? And we're going to start with you.
Thanks. And thanks to the citizens of Northampton for giving me the opportunity to be their mayor for the last 6 years. I have really enjoyed it. It's a great job because it's a great city. And every day I have challenges that sometimes that I couldn't have imagined. But there's always people out there to work with to try to find solutions. We have a city full of people who are smart and enterprising and trying to work on solutions. And we have city staff that have really have the best interests of the city at heart, and they're a joy to work with. So I hope that the citizens can see their way clear to electing me again for another 2-year term on November 8th. I ask for your vote and for your support, and I really do thank you very much for the support that you've given me so far.
You have 1 minute. And less.
1 minute. Well, a lot of that I have to agree with. To me, the work of being a mayor in this city would be extremely pleasurable in spite of its challenges, and it's something that would test certainly my own intellectual and emotional capabilities, but that's the kind of challenge that I crave. That's why I took on the task at HCAC. It explains a lot of my own history, and this is a great city to work with. I would look forward to what I could accomplish. I'm really interested in accomplishing the economic development and business revitalization in Northampton. I think it's important to our future for tax revenues, for jobs, and for incomes, and I know I can do that. So that is very exciting. And what also excites me is the open space environment of Northampton. So I want to thank everybody, and I hope you'll vote for me for the future of Northampton.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I thought that went great. I appreciate you both. It's nice to have